What you're seeing on screen right now is our first official look at the next Battlefield, coming in 2025. And as you can see on screen, I cannot be more excited at the prospect of a modern setting filled with helicopters and attack boats going at it, while an ever-growing forest fire starts to ravage the dense urban city somewhere in Europe. Boys, we may be getting Battlefield 4.5. It's been an interesting 24 hours for the Battlefield community. One filled with news, and actually good news for once. So I was trying to make myself breakfast and an article was published by IGN where the writer Kat Bailey was able to sit down with Vince Zampella, the overseer of the Battlefield franchise, and talk about what's to come for Battlefield in the future ahead of their Investors Day, where they would go on to reveal even more pieces of information on the title and the future of the IP. Vince Zampella will go on to confirm that the next Battlefield game will indeed be in a modern setting. Not the near future as seen in 2042, but in the current world you can look outside and see. The game will indeed return to a class-based gameplay, getting rid of the specialist mechanic that was seen in 2042. But the more important thing to look at is the confirmation that it's going for a back-to-basics approach, seeing what worked for the franchise in the past and just simply improve off of that. It's going to be inspired by Battlefield 3 and 4. Not only is the game going to return to that 64 player count, but the maps will be specifically designed for that player count, with Vince going on to say that he'd rather have nice, dense, well-designed play spaces that cater to that 64 player count. A nice welcome addition that I admittedly didn't see coming is that the game is going to feature natural disasters, with the one used as an example in the concept art being the expanding wildfires. And all of this being shown off in our first official piece of concept art for the game. On the right hand side, we can see the forest fire slowly creeping its way towards a seaside urban city that looks to have some European design language, with some people already speculating that it's depicting a city somewhere in France or Italy, with some people pinpointing the concept art depicting Gibraltar by matching up key landmarks with Google Maps. Regardless of location, we can see that the city is engulfed in urban combat, with the looks of some buildings already being collapsed. And as you move towards the ocean, you can see a silhouette of modern day destroyers. And right above that are the outlines of 3 attack helicopters that look close to be the US AH-64 Apaches, but they could also be Russian Mi-28 Havocs. Or if EA has the balls again, they could potentially be the Chinese WZ-10s. But without the confirmation of what factions or countries are going to be in the game, all of this is just up to speculation for the meantime. But the article doesn't just stop there, as the article goes on to say that the vision for Battlefield moving forward is to have multiple different types of play, and trying to expand the scope and reach of the Battlefield IP. So if you want to go and experience something different, you wouldn't have to leave Battlefield. This of course goes well in line with the leaks of the next game having a battle royale and that gauntlet mode that was essentially the finals. But it doesn't just stop there, as the following day EA would hold their first ever Investors Day. You've seen the Disney, you know what I'm talking about. It would be here where they would go on and officially reveal that the game has entered full development earlier in the year, presumably around the same time they announced the end of support for 2042. They would go on to reveal that there are 4 studios in charge of making the game, with DICE leading the multiplayer, Motive leading the single player narrative, Criterion being split up and supporting both single player and multiplayer efforts, and Ripple Effects working on a brand new experience that is very likely to be a battle royale and or extraction game mode. Along with this information, they would go on to reveal that the game is playtested on a weekly basis, on a new system that allows for new iterations to be turned out at a much faster time frame to playtest and give feedback on. Throughout both the IGN article and the presentation at the Investors Day, there seems to be a big emphasis on community first, trying to correct their mistakes from the past, but also admitting that it's their job to gain the trust back of the community, not the other way around. So one of their first steps in doing so is allowing the community to get their hands on the game much earlier, with a new community-driven program coming earlier next year. Could this be the return of the community test environment with actual emphasis on testing mechanics? We don't know yet, but we do know that the team wants community input and feedback at a much faster time frame to get the game correctly. In the event, we also got a look at 2 new pieces of concept art. The first one depicting a couple of tanks traversing a scorched clearing on their way to a missile silo, located in the middle of I don't fucking know, with jets overhead. Now admittedly, I can't really identify these tanks at all, as from this angle I can't really match it with anything, but what it does look like to me is the back of an M5 tank from 2042, with the angle of it matching up surprisingly well, but that's just my eyes, alright? It's a little bit too hard to tell. Maybe they're just modified Abrams, maybe they're just Leopard 2s, maybe they're just Panther KF-51s. Who knows? It's a little too hard to tell. Same goes with the jets. They're too small. I can't tell what they are. But the other bit of concept art is also equally as exciting as the rest. Here we have what looks like to be a Middle Eastern setting, with a soldier on the left that looks eerily similar to Afghanistan-era Marines. While on the right of the image we see what could be the UH-60 Black Hawk touching down or dropping supplies in an area that's slowly being reduced to rubble. This shit has me so excited, as in the 3 pieces of concept art provided to us, it's very obvious that not only are they depicting different types of engagements, from very urban close quarters combat to wide open tank battles, but for the fact that they are all depicting different parts of the world, telling my little pea brain that for the next game we may be getting a full global conflict, one where writers can freely write a compelling story about our fictional leaders going up in arms and plunging the world into chaos. I just hope with the global conflict we can get individual countries be represented in full rather than their equipment and gear be slotted in a broader alliance of nations. Not really connected, but during the event, EA would go on to announce their new AI assistant that would pave the way of user-created game content. And in the demonstration, they showed off some weapons, and people have been speculating that the animations for the gunplay and the gun movement are taken from the next Battlefield. So, there's that. But with every breaking news comes the various of news outlets ready to ruin their reputation with information that they withheld until it was convenient for them to release. And in the past couple of hours, more information have started to leak out from those who claim to have playtested the game early. But we'll focus on the former of the two right now. So Tom Henderson this morning has released an article going over the latest information that has been revealed over the past couple of days, saying that a lot that was revealed confirmed his information he previously leaked, but he would also go on to give more information on the title, such as the time frame of the game, as it's now narrowed down to somewhere between 2027 and 2030. The campaign would focus on a big PMC going up against NATO. The game will in fact be set in various locations worldwide, from Gibraltar to the mainland US. Ripple Effects New Experiences is set to be a free-to-play battle royale and extraction shooter set in the US with a tropical setting. The game is set to release with 45 different weapons on launch. The goal right now is to release 10 multiplayer maps on launch. The game is going to overhaul its destruction mechanic by introducing caliber-based destruction, similar to Rainbow Six Siege, where different caliber of bullets cause different amounts of destruction. The game will see changes to its movement system, with one of the examples being the ability to pick up and move down players. And currently people are being surveyed whether or not the next game should be titled Battlefield 6 or simply Battlefield. While the stuff Tom said is still up to speculation, I would still be in line to believe it. But in game development, ideas rapidly change. But what isn't left to speculation is the fact that developers have gone to Twitter to confirm that the game will in fact launch with a scoreboard. Yippee. It doesn't take much to hype up a community. Give bits and pieces of information here and there, pair it up with a cinematic trailer that has a big explosion or the obligatory holy shit moment, and that's enough for a casual audience to be interested in the title, but not for a dedicated fan base. It takes a lot more to get these guys to get hyped about anything. And in a sad and broken community like the Battlefield community, it takes a lot more than just buzzwords to get us hyped. Sure, the possibility of something being great is a pretty cool thought to have, but it's one that's often met with disappointment once we see what's actually waiting for us on release. Especially when it's just a faceless corporation telling us why we should be excited for the next game. That's why this article feels different from usual. This article has managed to resonate with me and a lot of other jaded community members, and especially content creators, who have all had the same positive reaction to the article. Now, this could have been any other press release by IGN. The writer could have just listed off what the game was going to be with information provided by EA ahead of their investor day, and that would have been it. And that would have been perfectly in line with what AAA gaming has felt for a while now. Just a faceless entity telling us what's going to be released and why you should be excited for it. But this article didn't feel like that at all. Not only did they get the head of the franchise to speak on the project, but they just allowed the guy to just talk freely. Allowed him to not only just list off what was going to be in the next project as vaguely as EA allowed him to be, but also, and what I think is most important, is the reasoning to all the design decisions being made. The article starts off with their reason why they returned to a modern setting, with Zampella's response being, I mean, if you look back to the peak or pinnacle of Battlefield, it's that Battlefield 3 and Battlefield 4 era, where everything was modern, and I think we have to get back to the core of what Battlefield is and do it amazingly well. And then we'll see where it goes from there. That right there. I really love. The understanding by the dev team that before they are allowed to do some of their really out there ideas, they first have to figure out what the core gameplay is like. In a franchise that has had several different changes in their core gameplay, it's pretty hard to pick one that's universally loved, as picking one always invites people to disagree and say something else is far better because it's their personal favorite. So to hear that the studio has decided to go with Battlefield 3 and 4 as their main inspiration when designing the game, as it was a time period where people can universally agree that Battlefield felt like Battlefield. Two armies going at it with faceless unnamed troopers battling out with mechanized vehicles of war supporting where they can. So it's nice to hear that it's not only a great time period that community has always wanted to return to, but something that the dev team actually wants to work on. But I think for me, it's that peak of Battlefieldness is in that Battlefield 3 and 4 days. So I think it's nostalgic for players, for me, for the teams even. Those are kind of the heyday. Now, admittedly speaking, it's very easy to simply say something like this. After a company releases a product and that product is received poorly by the community at large, it's very easy for a company to sweep the mess under the rug and promise people that it will be better next time by getting people excited with buzzwords they have always wanted to hear. And in a franchise like this, we are sadly accustomed to it by now. Battlefield doesn't really have a good track record as of late. It's failed, and it's failed a lot. But with every release, we have only gotten a promise that the next one would be better than the last, without the acknowledgement from the design perspective why the previous titles failed to resonate with fans. And that isn't sounding to be the case right here. When asked why the game would be going back to 64-player focused maps, Zampella would go on to say, "Yeah, 128 players. Did it make it more fun? Like, doing the number for the sake of a number doesn't make any sense. We're testing everything around what's the most fun. So like you said, the maps, once they get to a certain scale, become different. It's a different play space, and I think you have to design around that. So we are designing something that is more akin to previous Battlefields. I'd rather have nice, dense, really nice, well-designed play spaces, and some of them are really good. I can't wait for you to see them." He would also be asked whether or not specialists would be in the game. "So I wasn't there for 2042. I don't know what the rationale was. But for me, it's like the team would try something new. You have to applaud the effort. Not everybody liked it, but you gotta try things. It didn't work. It didn't fit. Specialists will not be coming back. So classes are kinda at the core of Battlefield, and we're going back to that." In a time where studios are quick to blame everyone but themselves for the faults of their own games not hitting the mark, it's impressive to see someone acknowledging that the franchise has fucked up on multiple core fronts, and no one is at fault but themselves. Kind of sad that the bare minimum is reason for applause, but it's more transparency from these devs that we usually get, so yippee. A gaming franchise is only as strong as its fanbase allows it to be. A studio can try its hardest to please a fanbase after a botch release, but if the community doesn't care for it, then it creates a stagnant community. One that still feels bitter and betrayed by the slop they were presented with at release. So now, more than ever, a game needs to be good on release. Because, in reality, that's all that matters. If life has ever taught me everything, it's that first impressions are important. You can only have one first impression with everyone. You want to be highly presentable and confident for your first time being seen in the public, and same goes with video games. People's tolerance with bullshit continues to dwindle by the day. $70 comes with a lot of expectations. That differs from person to person, but the number one thing that $70 price tag comes with is that the game isn't broken on release, and actually, works. Zampella in the article stated that they don't want another 2042, and that we want it to be good out of the gate. In a field where botch releases and broken messes are sadly becoming the norm, it's nice to hear that a studio has that mindset from the get-go. Again, sad that there's applause for the bare minimum, but it is what it is. But the article doesn't just end there. We live in a time of unoriginality in media. Rather than taking the risk in creating a new IP, studios both in film and in gaming tend to stick to IPs with big name recognitions, because it's been proven that people are more inclined to get into something if it has a familiar name attached to it. And with companies chasing current trends, they always push for projects to have similar modes, to have something that chases those same trends, making these projects lose their true identity of what made their games great to begin with in the process of making fast money. Nowadays, a game is expected to have a fully fledged campaign, a fully fledged multiplayer, and on top of that, a battle royale or extraction based shooter, just to check off the boxes for investors that the game does have it. It's basically unavoidable in today's market. Are these expectations good? Depends who you're talking to, as these experiences can spawn a fanbase of their own. The next Battlefield will not be shying away from this at all, by the way. With the mass amount of studios working on the title, it was only a matter of time before something gets announced, and while it's still vague what it is, there's still some reassurance that this won't take away from the core experience and isn't the main focus of the game as of now. Yeah, it's definitely betting bigger on Battlefield. It's going in and expanding what Battlefield is. We have to have the core. The core Battlefield players know what they want. They've been with us forever. They've been amazing supporters. We need to earn their trust back and get them back on our side. And then it's expanding out and getting more players into the universe and seeing what we can do. So when you want a different experience, you don't have to leave Battlefield. You can experience more things within the Battlefield universe, so we're expanding the offerings we're giving. He was even asked about Battlefield making the jump into other forms of media. There are definitely opportunities there. We've had some discussions, but it's not our core business. To me, that stuff, when it works, is super cool. Like Arcane was fucking great. But there's other ones that haven't worked as well, and I won't name those, but you know what they are. It's basically a marketing opportunity of getting your franchise out there, and it's not core to what we're doing right now. So we are game first. That has to work, and if the right opportunity comes, absolutely we'll look into it. But right now, we're not looking at anything like that for Battlefield. It's healthy to have competition in the gaming scene. Seeing a franchise go at it with another for the customer $70 is always a fun sight to see, as genuine rivalries can cause for both franchises to try and outperform the other, whether it be in features or genuine better gameplay design, leaving the only victor in all of this being the consumer who has two great games to pick from. For the longest time, Battlefield and Call of Duty were seen as competitors, the two giants of the FPS genre, going at it to see which franchise can disappoint their fanbase the fastest. Both of these franchises do their own thing, and at a time did their things pretty well, until they just started stealing from one another, with Call of Duty for a time going with a much slower pace approach, much like the older Battlefield titles, and Battlefield taking a much more fast-paced, twitchy approach, similar to Call of Duty, essentially both franchises losing themselves in their attempt to outperform the other. Depending who you ask, Battlefield has been going down that trajectory for a while now. Despite the fact there's actual competitors for the franchise on the horizon, it's still being compared to Call of Duty. So when asked if Battlefield has that power to outperform Call of Duty, Vince Zampella made it be known that Battlefield right now is focused on being Battlefield first. If you look at the best Battlefields that have outsold some Call of Duty and the other way around, back and forth, so I think it absolutely can. But I mean, is that what we're going for? I mean, not directly, but always. We're not looking to take down Call of Duty. We're making something that's different, and we're making something that's us. In a desperate time when the franchise needed it the most, Vince Zampella has managed to grab the attention of the most jaded and tricking them into getting invested for another potential failure. Okay, that's a joke. All right, fuck it. I have no segue. Next section. A promise that a studio has learned from their mistakes and that everything moving forward will be better this time around because they are closely listening to community wants and are dedicated to giving the fans the game they always wanted. We've been here before. I don't want to come off as some jaded person who hates the possibility of fun, but in this franchise, it's hard not to be when we constantly get disappointed at release. While everything Vince Zampella has said in the article is literally everything I wanted to hear to come from this next game, at the end of the day, it's still just words on a screen. Most of the excitement I have right now is because I'm imagining what these words may turn out to be. A game can be the best thing since sliced bread on paper, but the execution of those ideas are ultimately what matters more at the end of the day. Sure, the gameplay is set to take inspiration from Battlefield 3 and 4, but 2042 was also set to have those same inspirations in development. And look how that turned out. Hearing that the game is being made for the fans can only take you so far when that fan base has already heard the same line time and time before. Something can be made with the best intentions in mind and still fall flat on day of release. But I say all of this not to be a Scrooge or anything like that. I like what I heard. I liked that Vince Zampella is showing that he's not only a guy working for the brand, but clearly a fan of the franchise who knows the community and knows exactly what to say to even get the most jaded perk their ears around in excitement. I believe the mindset of focusing on what makes Battlefield Battlefield, rather than seeing what's working for others in the scene and basing their gameplay off of that. It's a wonderful thing. Allowing your franchise to be its own thing with its own identity, rather than being seen as another big game's competitor or the quote-unquote killer. Wanting to expand your horizons with a franchise shouldn't come at the sacrifice at the base game's core gameplay. The mistakes of the past shouldn't be something brushed off as an attempt to do something new that ultimately failed to connect with fans. They should be learning lessons to the studio that needs to understand not just that they didn't work with fans, but why didn't they work with fans. A full understanding of what works with the community and what doesn't. Everything I wanted to hear for the franchise from a development side was here, but all on paper. I don't doubt that the team behind the project has the capability of bringing us something that can put the Battlefield franchise back on everybody's radar as a franchise that's worth playing, but I can't get too excited for words on a screen. Excitement this early on is purely fueled by our own imaginations. Taking this image right here and hearing that this game is heavily inspired by Battlefield 3, heavily inspired by Battlefield 4, that it's going to have classes, it's going to have 64 players, it's going to have maps designed for 64 players, it's going to have that grayish tones in its art design we saw back in Battlefield 3 and 4. It's going to have next generation destruction. It's going to be set in modern times with modern armies and factions. All sounds like the best Battlefield to have ever released in years. In actuality, we have seen nothing besides this concept art. Just like every other piece of concept art that exists for a project, it's an artist rendition meant to help developers visualize their ideas for the direction of a project going forward. It's not until we see our first look of footage is when we can finally see if they stick with this tone and feel for the world they make. And it's going to be even longer until we the community gets a hold of the game to test and feel if the game truly does take these games into their design philosophy. There's a lot riding on this release, both from the developers and the community alike. EA doesn't want another 2042. The developers don't want another 2042. And the fans don't want another 2042. Everyone is in a mutual agreement that they just want the next game to be good. We all love to get hooked on the endless possibilities of a title before any footage gets released, in a time when all we have are just bullet points on a whiteboard. But now more than ever is a time to settle those expectations. Daydreaming about the what ifs for a game create big and sometimes unjust expectations in our heads, ones that a game may just never meet. And when we do see the game for the first time in motion, it just opens a door for being disappointed because it failed to meet the expectations of something you made up in your head. And that's really what I'm trying to get at here at the end. Keep your expectations in check. Keep your expectations reasonable, and keep your expectations grounded in reality. The first step in a game's marketing cycle is to simply create buzz. Tell us what we want to hear. Get us excited that something big is coming, and that this time it's going to be better. We have still yet to see what the game actually looks like, how vehicles are going to work, what's the TTK going to be like, what game modes are going to be there, what's the launch content like, what's the plan for the game post-launch, what's the campaign like, what classes are going to be in the game, what's the factions going to look like, is it going to be an alliance of countries, or are individual nations going to be represented? Are there any maps on US soil, Mexican soil, Canadian soil? While we got our first taste of info, we still in actuality don't know much about the game as a whole. But I'm still optimistic. Nobody wants a game to fail at launch. Not only do we feel like that we just wasted our hard-earned money into a product that does not work as intended, but the plans for the game post-launch change. Content that was once said to be ready to be released is then pushed back, as all efforts are then shifted to fixing the game. No one wins in these scenarios. Not the fans, and not the game developers. So once again, looking back at the article, I'm glad that Vince and presumably all other heads on the title are not delusional with the community. That they know that the game can be as good as they allow it to be. That they understand that it's up to them to get the community's trust back. We have a program that we're going to announce next year around getting more community in, because that's kind of the core of what we have to do. Get the community back on our side, get that trust back. So I think we're in a really good place. Is it challenging? Of course, but it wouldn't be fun if it wasn't.